Welcome back to Growing Kentucky's Leaders. I am one of your hosts, Sheldon McKinney, and we are celebrating a year of making Growing Kentucky's Leaders. This was just an idea that we had, like, wouldn't it be great if we could share some student testimonials or some donor testimonials of how FFA has become a big part of their story and how the Kentucky FFA Foundation has helped folks grow. And so we're proud of what Ruth Ann and I have created. I hope you've listened. But if you have some to catch up on, we decided this week we wanted to celebrate some of our most memorable moments. And there have been a lot of them, but we have broken them down to share with you our top 10 leadership moments or testimonials that folks have shared with us on the podcast this year. This is going to be a two-part series. So a quick catch up and a year in review here on Growing Kentucky's Leaders. First, let's hear from Cody Bagg. Cody was a National FFA officer from Menifee County, Kentucky. He also worked for National FFA and trained National FFA officers, including Ruth Ann. And here on the podcast, he shares with us some of his 5 greatest leadership lessons.
But there were like 5 qualities or characteristics that I tried to always coach officers on and train them on, because I felt like those were the things that would really help them to be their best. And so the first 2 were humble confidence, really striking that balance of like knowing, hey, be humble, right? Nobody's better than you. You've still got a lot to learn. There's room for growth, but also be confident. Like there's nobody like you. You're one in all of eternity. And so you need to live into those uniquenesses and be confident and come ready to play and lean into that. And don't ever get haughty and prideful, but also don't let anybody put your light out. So striking that right balance of humility and confidence, and keeping that so they have a right view of self. Another one was awareness. I always felt like really great national officers and great leaders in general, these apply to leaders at all levels, are just aware. They're self-aware. They know how they come across, what they're good at, what they're not good at. They're aware of situations around them. Can they see what's happening? And then really, okay, if that's what's happening, how can I show up best in this scenario to be helpful, to be a blessing, to move whatever needs to move forward. So we always talked about awareness and knowing what's going on around you and knowing what's going on inside of you as well, so you can be your best. Balance was a big one. And we talked a lot, the year can get busy, and I told him, hey, there's going to be times where you miss out on things at home because you have to do something that requires you to be an officer, right? Like that there's times that it's going to have the weight and the pull, but there's probably going to be times where you have responsibilities as an officer, minor ones, right? Trip reports, expense reports, where you're going to put them on the back burner because you need to call home or you need to call your nephews who's having a birthday or whatever it might be, right? There's times that's okay. Like you've got to strike that balance, and you're still a whole person, even though you're committed to the organization. And so always trying to help them find balance in that, and in the things they do. And I would even say too, balance in the work that they did, right? You got to balance things of like having fun, but also getting the work done. And we got to find those balances and figure out what's going to be most important when, so that we're making sure everything gets to the finish line. And then the last one is adaptability. I think it's huge, right? Especially as an officer. One day they're in a board meeting with CEOs of Fortune 500 companies, and the next day they're in a middle school classroom full of boys and girls that are making silly jokes. And so it's like, okay, that's a big swing. How do you adapt yourself to fit in wherever you are so that you can be effective, and again, giving people what they need? And I'm big on preparedness. Like, it's kind of counterintuitive because a lot of people say, oh, I'll just be adaptable and go with the flow. So I don't need to be prepared. But I would say it's the opposite. The more prepared you are for what you know is coming, and like you've got your ducks in a row, then if something happens, you can then give your full attention to, okay, I didn't expect this to come, but everything else is taken care of. So I can give my full attention and focus on this and fix it, as opposed to if you're just winging everything, then you can get into trouble pretty quick. And I know that from life experience as well.
That's great advice for any leader. And I'm glad we were able to share that piece of wisdom again for all of you to hear. Next up, let's hear from Anthony Cook. Anthony works at Hallway Feeds. He's a former chairman of the Kentucky FFA Foundation Board of Trustees, and he shares with us some things about learning, earning, and serving.
There's a story that I relate probably too often to people that know me well. And I remember vividly walking through the barns at Keeneland during a September sale. And Mr. Robert Courtney kind of popped out of a barn. He was an elder statesman at that point, and I was walking with my father, my brother Matt, probably Stephen. It was at least the three of us brothers there with Dad. And I remember him stopping us because Matthew had just, at that point, had just signed on to go to officer candidate school with the Marines. So he was already in college, but he was signing on to go to officer candidate school with the Marine Corps the last 2 years of college as well. And I remember him saying, there's a time to learn, there's a time to earn, and there's a time to serve. And that's always stuck with me. And while I've kind of shifted on that a little bit, because I don't think we break those up as much now as we used to. I think when Mr. Courtney was growing up, you learned, you went to school, you earned, you worked, and then when you made that living and your kids were grown, you served. That was your time to go and give on and serve on boards. I think we mix all those at the same time anymore. But the point is that those are three very important things that you need to do. You need to learn, and you need to never stop learning. My story about Mr. Bob, that just deepened that for me. Never stop learning. You need to earn, okay? It is important, right? I'm married, got 4 boys, 2 are in college, senior and a sophomore in high school, gonna have 2 more in college soon. You got to earn. Now, it's not everything. That's not all there is, and that's why it's part of this. And the other part is you got to serve. To me, it's very important to serve. I would not be a happy person if I was not a part of meaningful experiences, serving on the foundation board for Kentucky FFA, being very active in my church community, other leadership roles, whether it's Cub Scouts, Boy Scouts over the years, American Feed Industry Association. I would not be a happy person if I did not have all 3 of those in my life. So
That was a great reflection from Anthony that's really stayed with me. How are we learning, earning, and serving in this season of our life? We hope that everyone has a chance to take a moment to reflect on that as we close out the year. And now I want to have another moment with Connor Richardson, a Kentucky agriculture teacher who shares the importance of investing in the future of Kentucky agriculture.
When I was in high school, I actually have my FFA jacket hanging on my chair, and that's one of my proudest pieces. My first FFA jacket, because my parents couldn't afford it, and and our chapter alumni donated a jacket to the first person that said the FFA creed in front of the ag class, and so that's how I got my first jacket. And the like going to WLC, that wouldn't have been possible without my local farm bureau paying for me to go to WLC. I wouldn't have, when I was a state officer, the miles that I traveled, I would have never been able to do that without the foundation helping pay for those miles. I was a broke college student and trying to travel all those miles. I think I put 20,000 miles on my car that year. But so many people have invested in me, and ultimately it's my turn to give back. I got to a point in my career where I said, well, it's not a lot, but I can give $10 a month, and I would love to. In the future, I will definitely give more, but I know that that little bit that I give, I've always had faith in Sheldon and the foundation of how they steward that money, and it's just fantastic to see if all past state officers or if all past FFA members gave $10 a month. That is crazy to think about the impact that could have, and that just means that I eat at home instead of going to Wendy's one night each month or something like that. And so I think the foundation has the ability to multiply that $10 and really make an impact on students.
These stories never get old. Gifts from our donors are truly changing lives for generations to come, and giving can be anything from a small monthly gift to a planned gift in your estate plans. Speaking of legacies, let's hear from a legendary Kentucky agriculture teacher, Miss Toni Myers, on how showing up for people can make a world of difference.
We had a fella that was took charge of that alumni group I started at Boyle. He was a grandfather of a student. His name was Dr. Tom Ross. He was a veterinarian I just thought the world of, and him and I became really close. He passed away of COVID, and they asked me to speak at his funeral. And when I was thinking about remarks I want to make about Dr. Ross, it was for sure about his leadership style, but it was quiet. He didn't there's not a quote I'm going to give you that Dr. Ross would tell me. I'm just going to tell you how he lived his life. And he lived his life by showing up. Way after his granddaughters graduated, he kept showing up. And so I think the best leadership advice I've ever been given has been by Dr. Ross, by caring enough about people that even though it's your time's up, you've retired, you could bow out, that you still have value, and that he brought so much to our chapter and did so much for that alumni group and got us off the ground on so many things and so many benefits for our students that are just immeasurable. So I think being a true leader is one that just takes the time, cares enough about the people that they're investing their time in, and they give of their time.
We get to hear success stories from so many of our wonderful ag teachers here in Kentucky. Teaching agriculture is a noble profession, and they influence the lives of so many young people, and they help them find careers and find the right paths for themselves. Next up, let's hear from Jeremy Hall, John Hardin High School agriculture teacher, on why he chooses to teach ag.
It's the greatest job in the world. And again, you get to impact lives every single day. So it's a huge responsibility. But for those that are looking into ag as a career, I get paid to have a great day every day. Like there is no bad day. There's difficult days, but there's no bad days.
Yeah.
The students, they want you in that room. And it's those relationships and those ongoing relationships that we have. This morning I was texting 3 or 4 of my former officers, and we're having dinner a couple of days. They're in their late 20s, and they're still making time to sit down and talk to me. So I think ag teaching is so different than nothing wrong with other subject areas, but I think our hearts and our relationships that we have with our students, it's just a very special thing.
From leadership lessons to the impact of giving to why young people should consider a career in teaching agriculture, we have really had the best time hearing from the industry's best this year. Join us next week for part 2 of our top 10 moments. And thanks for tuning in to another episode of Growing Kentucky's Leaders. Growing Kentucky's Leaders is a podcast brought to you by the Kentucky FFA Foundation. Our music is performed by Bourbon County FFA member Joe Fritch. Artwork is by Julie Fritch Creative. Your hosts are Sheldon McKinney and Ruth Ann Fink, and you can find us on all social platforms at Kentucky FFA.